The Supreme Court hearing room fell silent as Representative Jasmine Crockett stepped up to the microphone. Justice Brett Kavanaugh sat confidently behind the bench, that familiar smirk playing across his face. He had just dismissed her previous question with a wave of his hand and an audible chuckle that echoed through the marble halls. The 33-year-old Congresswoman from Texas looked small standing before the 9 justices, but what she said next would wipe that smile off Kavanaugh's
face forever.
"Your Honor," Crockett began, her voice steady despite the tension, "I have one more question that I think deserves a real answer, not laughter." Kavanaugh leaned back in his chair, still grinning, clearly expecting another softball he could easily deflect. He had no idea what was coming. What happened in the next 30 seconds would not only silence the room but send shockwaves through Washington, D.C. and beyond. The viral moment that followed would make Crockett a household name and leave Kavanaugh's reputation hanging by a thread. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of these explosive political moments. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this plays out. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the deep divisions in American politics and show the world that sometimes the most powerful people can be brought down by the truth. To understand the magnitude of what happened that day, you need to know exactly who these two people are and why their clash mattered so much to millions of Americans. Representative Jasmine Crockett had been making waves since arriving in Congress just 2 years earlier. At 33, she was one of the youngest members of the House, a former public defender from Dallas who had fought her way through law school while working multiple jobs. Her background was about as different from the Washington elite as you could get. She grew up in a working-class family, knew what it meant to struggle for every opportunity, and had spent years defending people who couldn't afford high-priced lawyers. But don't let her relative newcomer status fool you. Crockett had already earned a reputation as someone who did her homework, asked tough questions, and wasn't intimidated by powerful men in expensive suits. Her colleagues called her fearless, sometimes as a compliment, sometimes as a warning. Justice Brett Kavanaugh, on the other hand, represented everything the establishment held dear. At 59, he had spent decades climbing the ladder of conservative legal circles. Ivy League educated, former Bush administration insider, and now lifetime appointee to the highest court in the land. His confirmation hearings had been among the most contentious in Supreme Court history, but he had survived the storm and now sat on the bench with the ultimate job security. Kavanaugh was known for his sharp legal mind, but also for his sometimes dismissive attitude toward what he saw as grandstanding by liberal politicians. He had a habit of cutting off questions he didn't like, and wasn't shy about showing when he thought someone was wasting his time. This wasn't just any Supreme Court hearing. The case at hand involved voting rights in Texas, specifically whether new restrictions on mail-in ballots violated the Constitution. For millions of Americans, especially in communities of color and rural areas, this decision could determine whether their voices would be heard in future elections. Crockett wasn't just representing her district that day. She was speaking for everyone who had ever felt like the system was rigged against them, everyone who had been told to sit down and shut up by people in power. The room was packed with reporters, legal scholars, and activists from both sides. C-SPAN cameras were rolling. Every major news network had correspondents present. Whatever happened here would be dissected, analyzed, and debated for weeks to come. This confrontation didn't happen in a vacuum. For the past 2 hours, Kavanaugh had been increasingly dismissive of questions from Democratic representatives. He had interrupted Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez mid-sentence, rolled his eyes at Congressman Jamie Raskin's constitutional arguments, and generally acted like he was doing everyone a favor by being there. But it was his treatment of Crockett that really set the stage for what was about to unfold. When she first approached the microphone an hour earlier, he had barely looked up from his notes. When she asked about the court's previous voting rights decisions, he gave a curt, textbook answer that said nothing. And when she pressed him on the real-world impact of those decisions, he actually chuckled and said, "Congresswoman, I think you might be better served by taking a civics class." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Several gasps could be heard from the gallery. Crockett's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took notes, made some quick phone calls during the break, and prepared for round 2. What Kavanaugh didn't know was that Crockett had spent the break doing what she did best, digging into the legal record and preparing the kind of question that could cut through years of careful political positioning like a knife through butter. As the hearing resumed after the lunch break, you could feel the electricity in the room. Word had spread about the morning's tense exchanges, and now the gallery was fuller than before. Legal Twitter was buzzing. Cable news producers were telling their anchors to stand by for potential breaking news. Crockett walked back to the microphone. With a different energy than before, gone was any hint of nervousness or deference. Her posture was straight, her eyes focused, and she carried a thick folder that she placed deliberately on the podium. Kavanaugh, meanwhile, seemed completely relaxed. He was chatting quietly with Justice Thomas, occasionally glancing toward the Democratic representatives with what could only be described as amusement. If anything, his morning performance had boosted his confidence. He had handled the liberal questioning easily, made his points clearly, and even gotten some laughs from the conservative justices. "Justice Kavanaugh," Crockett began, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the chamber, "I'd like to return to the issue of voting access, if I may." Kavanaugh looked up with that same slightly condescending smile. "Of course, Congresswoman, though I hope we can keep this more focused than our earlier discussion." The word discussion came out dripping with sarcasm. A few chuckles rippled through the conservative side of the gallery. Chief Justice Roberts shifted uncomfortably in his center seat, clearly